All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Gibson Bristwell with Exit Equity LLC, and we are an M&A advisory firm, and we work with business owners as they are selling their business. And today we are here to talk with an expert around employee ownership. Specifically, we're going to dig into the specifics of the much talked about, little understood concept of an ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership program. I'm so excited to talk about that because it comes up all of the time as we are speaking with business owners. And so, with me today, I am so pleased to have that expert, Mr. Mike Pongon. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. And expert is such a tough phrase that maybe, I've done a lot in this space, but expert always feels like a little tough thing to wear.
Well, too bad. You're an expert today and you're an expert to me. So we're slapping it on there. But and as I say, like I'm so excited because this is just a question that comes up time and time again. And so before we really get into it, I would love to just give a little intro about how great you are.
Oh,
So, Mike is an accomplished senior executive and board leader with over 25 years' experience driving growth for both public and private companies. And his insights on leadership and innovation made him a respected voice in the business world. Mike has served as the CEO of Point B, where I have come to know him. That is a management consulting firm where he led the organization through a period of exponential growth and the navigation of setting up their ESOP plan. Mike has a business launch coming up soon, so I'm so excited to hear more about that when the time comes. And all the while, he's been assisting with organizations with a transformative approach in and around succession and business transitions. So that's why you become an expert to me, as you're really knowledgeable in that space in like the real world application of how this goes. And so with that, Mike, as we look as a business owner, right, they're looking at options for exit planning and preserving their legacy is always such an important key and thinking about where to start and how to do that. So, could you just start kind of talking about how that concept of employee ownership can fit into the landscape of exit planning and legacy preservation? And maybe like what are some of the different flavors of employee ownership as you kind of think about it and advise your clients on that?
yeah, I would love to. I think I'll just start with the idea that when you look at employee ownership, there's obviously an owner that is going through a transition or a sale where they want to preserve something about the company. The, the culture, the legacy, the attention to how they treat customers, vendors, employees. There's something that they're looking to go beyond themselves, that they see that opportunity and they really want to engage people deeply in the future of the business. So employee ownership is a great vehicle to do what I like to say, align the boardroom to the front lines, get everyone on the same page, and actually use it as an opportunity to educate people about some of the things that oftentimes when you work at a company you don't get educated on. How do we make money? How does it work? What does cash flow look like? What does it mean to grow a business? There's such a great opportunity through any employee ownership vehicle to make it about educating people and getting people aligned, that we're all driving towards the same outcome. So to me, I love the concept of employee ownership. There's so many different flavors from actually buying stock in a company. You could have employees buy stock. You could gift stock. You can do all kinds of things related to the stock transactions. Something that's well known in the employee ownership world is the ESOP because it's been a long developed program. There's a lot of companies that have adopted it. I think there's just over 6,500 ESOPs in the United States right now. So it's something that has been adopted. There's been a lot that's been tracked about ESOPs. Something that's interesting though, coming over from Europe, an employee ownership trust or an EOT is a new vehicle that has
Oh,
caught some steam lately, but it hasn't been as developed in the States yet. So one of the benefits in Europe is if you sell to an EOT, you can actually do profit distribution to employees tax free up to a certain level. And that's a really beneficial thing for the employees that participate, and the owners have tax incentives as well. In the US, what's really strong here for EOTs is there is an opportunity to avoid capital gains tax through an EOT or an employee ownership trust. But the benefits bestowed to the employees, there isn't really a tax savings or a tax advantage for that yet. And I think that's something that could be under development. Just to compare the two, there's about 32 companies in the US that are an EOT. So it hasn't caught on like fire yet,
Oh, wow. Yes, still at the beginnings.
but it was, I think, about 16 or 17 companies just a few years ago. So it's starting to catch some steam. But I think as people explore any employee ownership context, they want to look at the whole picture. You know, obviously preservation of the company is a big part of it, but what's the tax treatment for the seller? What's the tax treatment for the new owners? What are the benefits that can be bestowed upon the company? And because ESOPs have been around for a while, those things have all become pretty robust. And so an ESOP becomes a pretty attractive vehicle for people to get into. But like you said, oftentimes people don't understand them. They are complex in some ways because it is a qualified retirement plan. It's not just owning a share of stock. It's something much more than that. But that's what I see. Those are the options that are out there. There's a lot to discuss. We could probably speak for an hour just on that topic alone.
I know, I know. This was where it was hard to even narrow down what we were talking about. But that's where I do want to focus on ESOP because I feel like that's such, if I can say, a buzzword with business owners because they hear it, it sounds great, right? Employee, stock ownership and just, thinking of legacy in that way. So could you even just start with what the heck is an ESOP?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I said, I love that there's maybe two descriptions. There's the one that is the most impactful to business leaders and owners, which is it's a way to align people together. It's a vehicle for doing that. But the more technical definition is an employee stock ownership plan or ESOP is a qualified retirement plan. It's something it's regulated by the same things that your 401k in the United States are regulated by. So it is a qualified retirement plan, but it is a vehicle by which employees can hold shares. They're held in trust that the company creates on behalf of those folks. And when they leave, retire, those shares can be redeemed at a future value that creates wealth and opportunity for those participants. And so that's at a very high level what an ESOP is. If I think about what this means for sellers, it's the opportunity to transition your business to the next generation without having to sell to either a strategic buyer, maybe an industry competitor, or a financial buyer like a PE firm or a private equity firm. So you've got options outside of those two vehicles, and those are great vehicles. There's nothing wrong with those as being options. But if you want to do something different through an employee ownership program, an ESOP can be a great vehicle for that. And like I said, there's many of different flavors for that too. But I
Yeah.
think for the employees, having a stake in the outcome, which there's a book written about ESOPs called The Stake in the Outcome. But the idea of having a stake in the outcome is such a neat way for people to engage differently with their organization. And it's not for everybody, but it is an opportunity to build significant wealth over time for all participants. And I'll share as we go through this a few statistics because ESOPs are well researched. So there's a lot of information out there about how they perform against non-ESOP companies as well.
Okay. So fun. I love all of your research, that all of the knowledge you have. I really quick, kind of before we go too far, I would love to ask, like, who are the best companies eligible for an ESOP, and what are the characteristics that either make a company ideal for it or not ideal for it?
Yeah. Well, I think we'll delve into some of the complexities and the costs related to an ESOP because that will give people kind of a benchmark idea. If you've got a company with a couple of employees, it's probably not a good fit. It's too big of an investment to do something like that. And there's so many other good vehicles to do employee ownership if you were small like that.
And
Um,
can I ask on that? I've kind of heard like under 10 employees, just a no-go. Is there like a minimum number that you have in your mind that you're like, if you're under 10, for example?
Well, I know that you're looking for a definition. It's hard because you can have a company that has 10 employees that makes 2 million per head per year. That's a
Hmm.
very different company than a company that makes $200,000 per head per year. So
Yeah.
you don't know. Yeah, I mean, certainly a 10-person, 20-person threshold would make sense before you'd start to consider it. But there's some advantages that you get that it depends on how your business performs, what the revenue per person is in an organization. But I've got several clients right now that have less than 50, one that has less than 30 employees, and they've one of them has had an ESOP in place for over 30 years,
Hmm.
and that's as a small business. So it gives you some relative sense. But in today's world, an ESOP can cost $100,000 to put in, and so that's a significant cost. Now, for anyone who's listening to this that is in Washington, Washington has a new program where they provide tax relief in B&O taxes for anyone that sets up employee ownership. So you can get 50% of your startup costs reimbursed. So
Hmm.
that's a pretty significant amount. And it's tax credits for B&O. And for folks in Washington that know B&O taxes, there aren't many credits for B&O taxes in Washington. So it's a great way to help pay for a transition to employee ownership. And many states are beginning to follow suit, where they would like to convert to sponsoring and helping to make it easier for business owners to create ESOPs because there
Yeah.
are a lot of advantages to people.
Okay, well, one more thing on kind of what makes it a strong business to do an ESOP. Can you talk about what, from like a leadership perspective and a standpoint, what should ideally be in place? Because that's something I poke on a lot with business owners of, what needs to be in place as a business owner steps back from the business themselves.
Yeah, I would say that any business that's going to go through any kind of transition really needs the same things. It's all the same things that I know you talk about with
Music to my
folks
ears,
all the
yes.
time. It's the same things where you need a strong leadership team that can go beyond the current ownership team or person. You've got to have, growth opportunities for the business. It's really tough, whether it's a sale to a strategic buyer or a financial buyer or a transition to employee ownership. If you don't have good prospects on the future, it's very difficult to pull off. I think, oftentimes people think about employee ownership as a way to engage people. I think that's great, but it isn't a solution if you don't have an engaged culture. So if you don't have people that are committed and engaged, an ESOP's not going to do you a lot of good in terms of getting them more engaged. This is a long-term incentive program that takes time. So I think businesses that are a good fit have the same characteristics for any kind of transition they want to do. A strong leadership team, a strong growth opportunity, a vision for the future, and they're on a stable footing from a financial perspective. It's tough to sell a business to a new buyer if you're not. If you've got a lot of debt, you don't have a lot of cash, if you're not making money, it's really tough to sell a business. An ESOP transition is the same thing. You need to
Yeah.
have a great company, you've got to have a great outlook, and you want to be able to grow the business beyond the sale. Any buyer doesn't want to just buy something and have it stay the same. They want to buy something that they can turn into more. And an ESOP's the same way.
When I always think, and again, when I'm talking with business owners, when they're looking at key employees, I'm like, that's wonderful. And it seems to apply here too. Of that, of course, you've had key employees that have driven the business, but if you are not there, do the people you are going to keep in place have that business acumen and the want and the drive and the culture relation to keep the business moving forward? Because that, in a lot of cases, is a completely new skill set or tool that may not have had to be present with the key management team, depending on how involved owners are. So that's always something interesting to look at and think about, right? Because that can be a big shift for a new
Yeah.
team. And a lot of times, people want to step into that role and are excited, but can they, are they ready, and do they have the support
Yeah,
to
well,
do that?
I know from talking to you that you guys do such a great job of really trying to help an owner understand, are they ready? Are they is the business ready to go? And those operational processes that can be done without the key people is an important part. If this requires one person to always be around or two people to always be around, that's not a great position to be in because anything can happen. So being prepared by building good processes, having good documentation, knowing how the business runs and works, and having that be a system that's in place versus it being reliant upon a couple of key people and the knowledge that they hold in their head, that makes it very difficult. So I know that that's important to you. And when you engage with folks, it's the same thing for an ESOP. You need
Yeah.
to be able to build, and we think about this when we help clients through this. We think about, what's your North Star? Where are you taking the business long term? Because people need to know that if you're going through any kind of transition. And then the second part of it is understanding the heat map of the organization. Where are the risks? Where isn't there maybe redundancy, or where isn't there really a process in place that we need to put in place? What are there's always the alphabet soup of, KPIs, of OKRs, or whatever you want to call them. But basically understanding, what are your objectives, and then what are the metrics that you're going to track that help you understand if you're progressing things to the outcome that you want. I always
Hmm.
talk about, you know, the inputs are what you can control, the outputs are what you get. So when you think about sales, for a small business that's looking to sell, if you're relying upon one key salesperson that's out there closing deals, that's not a process. But if you know the inputs to that process, what are the things I need to be doing in order to create a sales pipeline, create sales opportunities for the business, that's when you get to a system level understanding. And it's important to do that in any kind of transition.
Yeah, yeah, in any kind of transition. And so that's where it's fun too, talking with business owners, right? Because just, I think I'll just say it blatantly because what it's like if you can do that, the options for what your exit looks like just multiplies, and you have so many more things that you can choose to do, which is, I think, ideally what most people want.
Yeah.
Okay, can we get into the nitty gritty? Like you mentioned, it could be 100 grand to set up an ESOP.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a bit about how does an ESOP work and what are the upfront costs and ongoing costs, both time and actual hard dollars
Yeah.
wise, just to keep it going?
Yeah. Well, I would say kind of start with first things first. And I know this is something near and dear to your heart too. And I've actually worked with Exit Equity on doing valuations. The first thing is always get a valuation done, understand what we're talking about, and use someone who's independent, who's got the skills and competencies to really look at the marketplace and understand the value. And you know this, but we've worked together on several deals because we know how important this is for companies to understand. And it's not always intuitive. People don't always start there. They don't start with, oh, I should understand what this thing is. But if you're sitting on an asset that's worth $1 million versus $7 million, there's a pretty big difference. And you think about what the differences could be, not only because you understand the value, but as you think about whatever transition vehicle you're using, there's a lot of things like tax implications that become important. So I always start with valuation first. Go find out what the thing is worth. The second thing is we often look at that kind of viability through a long-term financial study. So, actually, down at the Rady School of Business in San Diego, they have the Beister Institute, which does a lot of valuations for ESOP companies. They have a long-term financial model that they do, and it's a study to help you understand the viability financially of doing an ESOP. And what does that look like over a very long period of time? And that's the second place I go after evaluation is get the long-term study done because you need to hire a trustee. A trustee is the one who looks after the trust for you. There were some legislation changes a few years back that you really want an expert trustee. Now, you can be your own trustee for your ESOP, but I really tell owners all the time, the best value is to have someone take on that fiduciary responsibility for you so that you can focus on the business's transition. So going out there and finding a great trustee. And then, of course, you need an attorney or a team that is going to help draw up all the paperwork and help you actually create the mechanism that you want. Then you're going to need a partner that's going to do your ongoing valuation for the ESOP itself, and then a record keeper. Who's going to keep the records for your program, because this is a retirement vehicle, so it needs to be treated like a retirement vehicle record keeping type system, just like you would. You know, most companies don't do their own 401ks, right? They outsource that to somebody else. It's the same
Hmm.
kind of thing. So that's how they work. And what happens is in this process, you set up a trust that holds the individual account for the employees while they're participating in the program. And I say participating because you can participate even after you've left the company, because it depends on how the plan is designed, whether you're still a participant or not after you leave. Because the timing of when your shares get redeemed and your money gets changed out is different with every flavor of ESOP that people could create.
Okay, and then and I know this is probably going to be a bit of an it depends answer, but as if you are the owner and you are putting in place this ESOP at your company, on even after it's in place, what do you kind of prep owners for of their involvement? Like how much longer is that going to be kind of they're involved um, in any capacity as they're kind of transitioning out?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the benefits of an ESOP is, sometimes when you do an acquisition by a strategic partner, maybe a competitor, your time there could be limited. Maybe there's an earnout for a certain period of time, but the organization that wants to move on with the acquisition that they've made, and they want to create the thing that they intended to create from making the acquisition in the first place. I think with ESOPs, owners can be involved for a long period of time. Oftentimes they'll be on the board of directors. So when you have an ESOP, you're going to have a trustee that's going to look after the trust on behalf of all participants. And then you're also going to have a board of directors. So that's often a place that owners will move to, where they can get out of the day to day, but they can still be there to help provide some guidance along the way and help mitigate risks that come up over time. The typical roles that a board would play. So sometimes owners like to stay more involved in things like selling. So maybe they've got key relationships and they want to stay engaged in some way. Um, those things can all work, but most of the time, what I see is an owner or ownership group would transition maybe to a board, and that's how they engage with the organization. Not all owners, but maybe a small portion of them move into that role so that they can continue to be involved and guide the company over time. That's what I typically see.
I love that. And I think that's so important for owners to think about because, again, I know so much of it can get wrapped up in like, I'm not ready to let go now. But then when they really dig in and think about, oh, wow, there's actually a lot after the transition and whatever that looks like. Or it can be shorter if you want. But, I think that's something that I wish more business owners could know because there are so many succession plans and things that they can do and not just hold on and do what they've been doing now and then wait until the last minute or a health problem happens or they really want out and now they want out in 6 months, right? They're just not setting them after all these years, right? It's just you want them to continue to be planful and have that really nice exit of how they want to. And it's, I think, always really fun for my owners to see, like in any capacity, even if they do sell to private equity, if they continue to be on a board, they love that, right? They've built a lot, they have a lot of knowledge. So I think they forget about that they can be involved in that way. Go
Right.
play more golf, but be involved in that way,
Right.
right?
Well, one of the other benefits I'll say is, you can sell to an ESOP over time. So you could start your journey and, think about it, how most of us like to experience life. Most most of us don't want to just stop doing something cold turkey.
Yeah.
We want to have a transition. We want to mark the occasions. We want to see things through. So one of the beauties of this as a vehicle for transition is you can start, small. You could do a small transaction and maybe you convert 20% of the stock or 40% of the stock as a start to an ESOP, and then you could do the rest over time. And so there's lots of different flavors. I think there's a lot of flexibility and benefit that you get from being able to step through those things, maybe not all at once. But I think, again, back to the original question of like, what do we typically see? We typically see owners that they want to do an ESOP because they don't, they're not wore out on the business, that they just want out. They
Hmm.
want to see this legacy. They want to see the thing continue to go on beyond themselves. And so, as long as, and again, that's probably tough for all of us, as long as you could be a board member and not get yourself re-engaged in the day to day, that's always the challenge that people run into. But I find that's the way that people like to do it: stay involved, help provide some guidance. Quite frankly, think about I'm working with a company right now. They've got about 60 employees, and they're considering an ESOP as one of their transitionary vehicles. They're looking at a bunch of others. But think about those employees that maybe this is the first time they've heard of an ESOP. So if the
Hmm.
owner were to just leave and all of a sudden now this is our company and we have to take care of it, that might be kind of daunting. And to be able to say, no, we're gonna go through this journey with you. You've helped us along the way as we've built this business as owners. You've been part of it. We're going to share that with you, and we're going to help you get into the next stage as well. I just think that's a lovely way to approach it where no one has to feel abandoned by anybody.
Yeah.
Uh, so,
Okay, that touches on one because I was going to say all of this sounds pretty darn great. Mike, sign me up for an ESOP. But what are some cons? What are some things that you see either about companies or just about ESOPs in general that are things that may not fit or, you
yeah.
know,
Well, I would say that, if you were to go out there using today's technology, you could do a search on what are the biggest drawbacks. And I think most of the results you get would be around cost, complexity, compliance. And I think to some, if you dig really deep, there's sort of the concept of the haves and have-nots. Someone who's been around for a long time in an ESOP versus someone who just joined. Obviously there's going to be a difference in the size of the accounts that they hold in the ESOP. And sometimes that people have cited that. I've never seen that personally, but that's something that I guess the news or somebody has pointed to quite a bit as being an issue. But I think it makes sense. If someone's been there for 10 years building the business and somebody's been there for 6 months, they're going to have very different positions in the proverbial cap table because of the experience and time that they've spent with the organization. So I think carrying debt, these are often done with debt vehicles. Carrying debt can be a challenge for some as well. If you've got a business that goes through an ESOP transaction and then immediately falls into difficult times, it can be tough to make the note payments or the loan payments to an external bank. So those can be drawbacks as well. There's not really a ton of value if the business doesn't grow. And I think, that's true for any transaction, especially if you have an earnout transaction. If you sell the business and you're on an earnout and the business doesn't perform, then you're going to see a massive reduction in the fees you're going to receive. It's the same thing for an ESOP too. If you if you think you're going to grow by 3 to 5% top line per year and you don't, well, the value of the stock's going to show that
mm.
because you're not going to see a huge increase in value. So those are the things that the ongoing
That's a
cost.
really good one though. That's a really good one. I haven't thought about it in that way, but again, I get to work with a lot of like really mature companies that have been doing their thing, which is great, and they're making great money, and they've been but pretty stable for
Yeah,
10 years. And so that's a really interesting thing to think about is necessarily, if their owner is kind of much more in their 80s, pretty done, and everything's pretty stable, that's in one way people I think great, it's pretty stable. This is a good time to hand off to employees, but a really good thing to think is that growth there to sustain what they want to do with handing it over to employees. So that's I haven't thought about it in that way before. So thanks for that one.
you bet. You bet.
Oh man, okay. Well, if a business owner is interested in further pursuing either an ESOP or just any type of kind of employee ownership, what should their next steps be as they're thinking through that?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is, we talked about at the beginning, like getting evaluation done is always a good place to start.
I'm just gonna pay you $20 every time you say that. I love it, right? Just
But it's just such an important step to really getting your arms around things. And the second thing I'd say, you can do a lot of research yourself. You can. There's plenty of tools available out there. The National Center for Employee Ownership, the NCEO, is a great organization that has a lot of information. Even in the state of Washington, there's actually a council in Washington that looks after employee ownership for the state, and there's a lot of providers on that board that are great resources for you to turn to figure out, is employee ownership right for me? What might I consider? There's also your network, and I've got a cautionary tale, and I want people to use their network too, because there are a fair number of ESOPs in the United States. You might only be a degree or two away from a connection that has an ESOP, and talking to people that have actually gone through it themselves and have been through the process is a great way to learn about how it's gone. Now, the cautionary tale is, if you only talk to one person and they had a bad experience, you may not be getting enough statistical relevance in that sample size to get the real data that you want. But it's always important to listen to the stories that people tell, because it's how we can learn.
mhm.
What could we do that's different? What are the circumstances we can create that can make this, a better experience for us, is important. Um, so there's lots
Or
of
the
different.
flip side, right? I feel like I get a lot of, hey, my friend is doing an ESOP, that's what I want to do, but not thinking through, okay, well, how similar are our companies and our leadership teams and everything that we touched on, right? To
Yep.
say, really taking the framework of what's good and bad and looking if it's right for me. So I can see that going both ways.
Absolutely. I would say the ESOP community, because I think everyone in the ESOP world has a bit of a similar worldview. This ESOPs are a way to really generate value for a lot of people. It's value and wealth building for, you know, a lot more people than traditionally happens inside a business, where maybe a few people make some wealth and everyone else makes a living. This is a chance to transfer some of that wealth. So I think everyone in the community is very supportive. So if we're talking trustees, attorneys, financial advisors, all those folks are very responsive in helping you think through what you want to do. And of course, we can help too. So, you know, our firm, which is built for leaders, we are, building our business around concepts like this to help organizations with those big transitions. So, starting from the place that I know you do at Exit Equity as well, helping people figure out, like, what's the right strategy and what does it look like. I want to know all the options before I pick the one that I'm going to choose for me. And just by way of a little bit of information and statistics, I did want to share a couple of things
Mm-hmm.
that might be interesting to people. And if you're a seller and you want to do an ESOP transaction, what they experience is 3 to 4% higher sales and employment growth than non-ESOP companies. And that's a pretty remarkable statistic when you think about that steady state business that goes into an ESOP. On average, they see about 3 to 4% higher sales and employment growth in the organization. There's a 4 to 5% increase every year in productivity as compared to non-ESOP companies. So, as a business owner who says, hey, maybe I want to do a transaction to start, and then maybe I'll do a finishing transaction, these are the benefits that ESOPs typically see, that you're going to experience higher sales growth, higher employment growth, and a higher productivity in your people. Now, the statistics on the employee side, the employee owner side, are pretty remarkable. One of them is companies that are ESOPs are 50% less likely to fail. That's a pretty big number.
Really?
50% less likely to fail. there's a 33% higher median income for the employee owners. That's pretty significant, but this number is going to blow you and everyone listening to this away. There's a 92% higher median household net worth for people that are part of ESOPs. So
Wow.
you think about the impact that that can make on a community. So maybe you have a business that's in a smaller town. You want to make sure that that business stays in town. So you do an ESOP because you're like, hey, this leaves town. This is going to be tough on this little town we live in. The impact of 92% higher median household net worth on a community like that is significant, where people have over time a lot more disposable income to invest and spend in those towns. So the implications of this are pretty significant. And so I love to talk to that. And I want to talk about one other thing, which is you don't just put an ESOP in, you got to pay for it every year. You have to get
Yeah.
evaluation done. You have to have a record keeper. You have to have a trustee. So what businesses tend to see is somewhere between $10,000 and $40,000 a year in ongoing expense. And I think that's important for people to know. And just by way of an example, I have a client right now that pays kind of in that ballpark, high, maybe mid to high $30,000 a year to keep their program going. Now, the benefits they get from that are if an S corp is your corporate structure and you're 100% employee owned, you pay no federal income tax. And that is significant for the business because whatever you're saving and not paying federal income taxes can be spent on investing in creating a new program for an ESOP or the ongoing maintenance that you have, as well as the repurchase obligation, which we didn't touch on earlier. And I think this is a very big consideration for people that, as people get awarded ESOPs at the front end of a program, on the back end of the program, their shares get redeemed and purchased. So the organization is repurchasing the shares all the time. And that can be a significant planning horizon to look at. That's why they do these financial studies up front, is to
Hmm.
look at, can you afford to sustain this over a long period of time, because there is a repurchase obligation that comes in. So that is a big consideration for a lot of people too, because that's an expense. Oftentimes the tax savings are either helping to or covering that additional repurchase obligation. So you're kind of repurposing that money to that place.
So it sounds like doing that study, because if you have kind of an older workforce and are starting this late, then that may have implications for you later if everybody's trying to
E-
retire at
Exactly.
one time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah, definitely a lot of footwork. It sounds like to plan first, measure twice, cut once on
Yes.
this.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and the idea of, compliance, especially if you've got a small business, you don't want to spend a lot of money on things like compliance because you want to grow your business, you want to service your customers, you want to take care of your people. Compliance feels like it can be a bit of an added burden. So I think it's important for people to have a pause and say, hey, if we're going to do this, we have to do it right. We have to get a trustee that's external. We need to get a record keeper that knows ESOPs and can do this work correctly. I want to work with attorneys that know how to do this, have been down this road before. And there's a lot of good people out there doing great work in this space. And when you work with an advisor like you or like me, we can help make connections for people to the right advisors to make sure they get the right advice at the right time to feel confident and secure as they move forward with whatever direction that they take.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. And if anyone listening wants to get a hold of you and get your great advice in person, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you and your team?
Yeah, I would say because, as you mentioned, we're in the middle of a launch. The builtforleaders.com website is not turned on yet, so we're just getting close to that. But you could reach out to me directly, and it's just MPONGON at builtforleaders.com if you want to reach out. I'd be happy to provide counsel. I'm part of that ESOP community too. The ESOP that we had at Point B was one of the largest in the country. So we love to reinvest in the community and help people find their way. And I think similar to Kara, business owners can feel confident that none of us are trying to put you into something that's not a good fit. We want to help you find the right fit for you and want to be helpful in that process. There's something really valuable, and you and I have talked about this, Kara, before. When you help somebody realize their dream, there's a whole different kind of satisfaction in the work that we do that is very human about that. For somebody who spent 40 years building a business, making sacrifices, maybe not getting as much free time or time with family or friends, to see them really be successful in making that transition and helping them realize this dream that they've had in their life, it's a super valuable thing. I love doing it, and look forward to talking more.
Yeah, me too. It's why we do what we do. But really, thank you for doing this talk with me because to me, this adds to those credible voices out there that people can lean on to just kind of start getting their feet wet and understanding this world. So thank you. Thank you. Really
Yep.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and look forward to connecting again.
All right, sounds good. Well, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.